It started like any other job, mundane, repetitive, and boring. Cleaning an unused subway station at night wasn't exactly the dream gig, but I needed the money. They warned me about the silence down there. Too quiet, they said. Too dead. I didn't care. Dead stations don't complain about dust. The first week was uneventful. I mopped floors, scrubbed graffiti, and pretended not to notice the occasional rat scuttling along the edges of my vision. But by the second week, something changed. Strange symbols began appearing on the walls. White chalk spirals, jagged triangles, and circles with dots in their centers. At first, I figured it was just bored kids sneaking in for kicks. Then one night, I found the symbols freshly drawn, the chalk lines impossibly pristine in the stagnant air. That was when I began to hear the whispers. I thought I was going crazy. It started faint, like the hum of distant machinery, but gradually it grew louder. Sometimes it sounded like murmured words, but I could never make out what they were saying. I told myself it was my imagination, just the effects of working alone in a desolate place. But I knew I was lying. The night she appeared was a night everything fell apart. I was scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain from the floor when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting a supervisor or maybe a trespasser, but instead I saw her, a woman in a long, tattered cloak, her face obscured by the hood. "Do you hear them too?" she whispered. Her voice was soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. I froze, the mop slipping from my hand. "What?" "The voices," she said, stepping closer. "They've chosen you. You feel it, don't you?" I wanted to tell her to leave, to get out before I called the cops, but the words caught in my throat. Her presence was overwhelming, her gaze burning into me even though I couldn't see her eyes. "They've been waiting," she continued. "Beneath the tracks, beneath the earth. The sleeping one stirs." I should have run. Instead, I stood there like an idiot as she handed me a piece of paper covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen on the walls. "Prepare yourself," she said, her voice trembling with something like reverence. "They'll come for you soon." Then she was gone, disappearing into shadows as quickly as she'd appeared. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe as I looked at them, and I shoved it into my pocket before I could lose my mind. That was the last normal night I had. The cultists came 3 days later. I was sweeping the platform when I saw them. 6 figures in dark robes, their faces hidden beneath masks carved with those same cursed symbols. They surrounded me, their movements precise and deliberate. I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. "You've been chosen," one of them said, their voice distorted by the mask. "For what?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "To awaken the sleeper," they intoned in unison. Before I could react, they grabbed me, dragging me toward the edge of the platform. My screams echoed through the empty station, but no one came. No one ever came. They brought me to a hidden chamber beneath the station, a cavernous space lit by flickering torches. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and something metallic. Blood, I realized. A massive stone altar stood in the center, its surface carved with grooves that formed an intricate pattern. "You are the final piece," the leader said, pulling back their hood to reveal a gaunt, weathered face. "The sleeper will rise and the world will bow." They began chanting, their voices melding into a low, guttural hum. I struggled against my captors, my mind racing. I had to think fast. "Wait!" I shouted. The chanting faltered, and the leader turned to me, their eyes narrowing. What if when he wasn't faithful?" I said, desperation fueling my words. "What if someone here is sabotaging the ritual?" A murmur rippled through the group. "Silence!" the leader barked, but doubt had already taken root. "You know it's true," I said, seizing the moment. "How else would I have known you were coming?" Someone warned me. The tension was palpable. The cultists glanced at each other, suspicion flickering in their eyes. "Who?" the leader demanded, stepping closer. "I don't know. I lied. But can you really take the risk?" It worked better than I could have hoped. They turned on each other, accusations flying as paranoia consumed them. The chamber descended into chaos, the once unified group now at each other's throats. I used the distraction to slip free, grabbing a torch on the wall and running toward the stone altar. The chanting had stopped, but the symbols carved into the altar glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Stop him!" the leader shouted, but it was too late. I jammed the torch into a crack in the stone, using all my strength to topple the altar. The ground trembled as the massive slab collapsed, sealing the entrance to whatever lay beneath. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard it, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Aaron!" It knew my name. The cultists screamed as the chamber began to collapse, the ceiling crumbling under the weight of the earth above. I didn't wait to see what happened to them. I ran, the voice echoing my mind. Even now, I can still hear it, whispering to me in the dead of night. It's still there beneath the station, waiting. And sometimes when the world is quiet, I wonder if I made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't trying to rise. Maybe it was trying to escape. It started with whispers, as most horrors do. A crumbling hilltop chapel, draped in legend and decay, became the subject of fascination in our small town. My brother Josh and I had heard the rumors growing up. Stories of midnight hymns, strange lights, and shadows that moved without source. For years, they had been dismissed as ghost stories, but something about them always tugged at me. Josh, ever the skeptic, mocked the tales, but I caught the curiosity in his eyes when a neighbor swore they'd heard chanting last week. It was almost a dare when he said, "Let's go check it out." How could I have known those words would echo in my mind for the rest of my life? The trek to the chapel was longer than I remembered. The path winding and overgrown, as if the land itself wanted to forget it. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow on the jagged remains of the building. Its steeple leaned precariously, a skeletal finger pointing toward the heavens, or perhaps warning us away. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and something sweeter, more decayed. My flashlight beam danced across warped pews and shattered stained glass, but it was a silence that unnerved me, until it wasn't silent anymore. A low hum vibrated through the space, growing louder until it became a chorus of voices. My heart stuttered as we turned a corner and saw them. A congregation of figures filled the sanctuary, their faces hidden behind chrome masks. The masks weren't cheap or theatrical. They were intricate, with dark feathers glinting in the dim light. Their chant, an ominousness in a language I couldn't place, rose and fell like waves, pulling us into its rhythm. Josh froze, his usual bravado slipping. I grabbed his arm, whispering, "We need to go." But before we could retreat, a figure at the altar turned to face us. He wasn't masked like the others. His face was sharp, his eyes unnervingly bright, and his smile, it didn't reach those eyes. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice smooth and warm, like a trap baited with honey. "You've come at a most opportune time." "We didn't mean to intrude," I stammered, pulling Josh's arm again, but he wouldn't budge. "Nonsense," the man replied, spreading his arms. "All are welcome here, especially those seeking to cleanse their sins." Josh, to my horror, stepped forward. "What kind of cleansing?" he asked, his voice tinged with the curiosity that had brought us here in the first place. The man gestured to the altar, a slab of stone etched with symbols that seemed to writhe when I looked at them too long. A ritual, a rebirth, to cast off the burdens of guilt and embrace purity. I wanted to scream at Josh, but something about the room, the air, made my voice falter. The congregation's chant grew louder, filling my head, drowning my thoughts. Josh stepped closer. I tried to follow, but the leader raised a hand, and two masked figures blocked my path. "Fear not," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Your brother will lead the way for us all." It was then that I noticed the symbols carved into the altar weren't just shifting. They were glowing, pulsing in time with the chant. The congregation moved, forming a circle around Josh, who knelt at the leader's urging. "Josh, no." I shouted, finally finding my voice. The leader frowned, his charm slipping to reveal something colder. "Silence, child. This is sacred." But I couldn't be silent. Not when I saw the leader draw a dagger, its blade jagged and stained. Not when I realized the chant wasn't just a prayer. It was a summoning. I shoved past the masked figures, grabbing Josh's arm. "We have to leave." The leader's smile returned, now cruel. "You cannot stop what is destined." As he raised a dagger, something clicked in my mind. This wasn't about cleansing sins. This was a sacrifice. "Josh, they're going to kill you." He hesitated, but the chant surged, drowning out my words. I grabbed Depew's broken leg and swung it, knocking the dagger from the leader's hand. The congregation reacted instantly, their chants turning to screeches, their movements frenetic. The symbols on the altar flared, blindingly bright. A guttural roar filled the chapel, shaking its very foundation. And then it came. The deity they had summoned was nothing like the serene gods of stories. It was vast, amorphous, a writhing mass of shadow and flame with too many eyes, each burning with rage. It tore through the congregation with an otherworldly scream, consuming them one by one. Josh and I didn't wait to see the end. We ran, stumbling over debris as the chapel began to collapse around us. The air was thick with dust and the screams of the dying, human and otherwise. We barely made it out before the entire structure caved in, burying the horrors within. For a long time, we just stood there, gasping for breath, staring at the ruins. Neither of us spoke. What could we say? The chapel was gone, but the memory wasn't. The image of those masked figures, the leader's cold smile, the deity's blazing eyes, all of it was seared into my mind. Josh tried to laugh it off in the days that followed, but I saw the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. As for me, I couldn't stop wondering, what if we hadn't disrupted the ritual? What if the deity hadn't turned on its followers? And what if, somewhere beneath those ruins, it still hungers? Josh and I never spoke of it again, but the bond between us changed. We were bound not just by blood, but by the weight of that night, by the knowledge of what we'd seen, and by the silence we kept.